Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naraman Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Today, well, we're going to do something a little different. It is still going to be my BESM World series, but I'm going to be talking about some things other than anime. I'm actually going to be talking about some role-playing games. Now, you're saying, okay, I talk about role-playing games all the time. I'm meaning video game role-playing games. I'm going to talk about 3 of them. I'm going to talk about Breath of Fire 3, Chrono Trigger, and Final Fantasy VI. Now, these are games which are considered very good, but they are my favorites, or some of my favorites, I should really say, and I wanted to bring in and talk about them. Now, each of these own worlds is very good for bringing into BESM. BESM makes it very easy to bring in, but when I'm going to be talking about bringing them into gaming, I'm also going to be talking about running them in either Pathfinder or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, because guess what? You can for these. Very, I wouldn't say easy, but it has an option for it because of the way the worlds are built, that these pertain to those decently. But let's just start talking about the games in them general so that you know about them. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VI. Now, Final Fantasy VI takes place on a world that's mostly untamed, and for the areas of it that are settled, it has a very distinct steampunk feel. So that's one of the more interesting things about it. It is a steampunk world. Now, in the world, there's this empire which is sort of threatening it as the overall plot of the world, of what's going on in the world, and there's a lot of battles and conquests going on, but that's sort of in the background. We meet our main character, Terra. Now, she works for this empire, but she happens to be sort of mind-controlled. She goes on this mission with a number of soldiers to recover a esper that's trapped in ice. Espers are these like magical beings which can be harnessed to have people learn to use magic. So, along the way, she gets free from the mind control. She gets influenced by the Esper, gets free, and she goes on an adventure. Now, she doesn't become the only main character. You play as other characters at different times that they become the main character, and you sort of then can switch between all of them. You get points in times where everybody's all together. It's very interesting that way, that you get these tonal shifts, that you just don't have the same main character all the time. All these characters become your main characters at different times. You have all these people that you might have one character that you're playing with for a while, and then you switch to another character that you're going to be playing with them for a while for some kind of quest line. And it's a very good game. Now, the overall storyline, you kind of fail to save the world, and it gets mostly destroyed, and then you have to save it again. So it's a very interesting in that way that you sort of fail to save the world at one point in time, and then have to come back, rally back, and stop the evil being which has effectively conquered the world from continuing their reign of terror. Now, like all role-playing games, especially these type, they're adventure kind of games. You go out on quests, mighty adventures, traveling across the land. I would call it a fantasy. Final Fantasy is in the name, but it has magic and monsters and mystical beings, but also it's a steampunk. It's steampunk. It's got that aesthetic of technology that you think would be more than what it should be for the time period, based upon like steam power and steam engines. Like, they've got mechanized suits and things like that. Now, I rate this one a 5, like I rate all of them. This one is an instant classic. Final Fantasy lovers argue between this one and Final Fantasy VII, which one's their favorite. I argue this one. 7's great because it entered the 3D realm. This one was great just because the characters, the story, and the music were wonderful. It didn't have the same graphics. If it did, maybe it would have been better in a lot of people's eyes. Hard to say. Both stories had some very good writing. Anyway, why don't we move on? Let's talk about Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger takes place in an Earth-like world. Things aren't huge. It's sort of like one kingdom exists in the entire world, almost. There's been some dark times in the history that have led to this point in time. So we meet Chrono, our main character. He gets up, he goes to the local fair, which is like the 1,000-year fair, the millennial fair, representing 1,000 years under the kingdom. And there he kind of gets into shenanigans. He runs into a princess. He goes and tests out a teleportation device, which turns out to be a time travel device. Gets sent back into the effective medieval times of his own timeline. And it starts off this amazing quest where they learn of like different pasts and futures. They learn that the future was destroyed by this apocalyptic being, so they eventually go to odds with that in hopes to basically save the future. That their world is safe, but the world will in the future will not be. So they seek out to undo what's going to happen, and they go on an entire quest line where you have multiple endings and this really cool cast of characters and from various different times. And it's a very fun game. And again, it's another one of those instant classics. Now again, it's another kind of adventure one. All of these games are adventure defines it very well because you go on quests, you go on missions that are sort of defined as what's going on in the game, but you always are traveling to new lands, new places, as things are sort of driven you in that direction. I definitely call it a fantasy. The characters learn magic. There's this mystical element to the world too. There's like an ancient magic technology kingdom that once existed that was destroyed. There's also, in that manner, I would also call it sci-fi, because you go to a distant future where, yes, the world's been destroyed and things are really terrible, but it's also, you know, you have all this technology there. One of the characters you get is a robot. So it's got this mixture of science and fantasy, but it's not mixing them at the same time. It says both are existing in this world at the same time. And again, it's a rated 5. Again, this is one of the top games people talk about often. So let's talk about Breath of Fire 3. Breath of Fire 3 takes place in a world that's almost sort of medieval in setting. We have our main character, Ryu. Now, he's of a race of people that have the ability to turn into dragons. So he's a human that can turn into dragons, and he's one of the last of his kind. Most of them have pretty much gone extinct. He wakes up in this mine where some of his, basically, kind when they died in dragon form, when they get fossilized, they form into this sort of material which can be used for magic-based sort of science, technology. So they can power things that are almost more technological with this element that's been formed out of dead dragons. Kind of a little morbid. Regardless, so he escapes, he meets up with these cast of friends, he goes on adventures, he eventually begins to learn what happened to his race, who he is, what he is. He gets into odds with this goddess, Miria, who technically was in the first Breath of Fire game, but that's an entirely other story. But it ends up that Miria ordered the genocide of the dragons, and you go on this quest to effectively confront her and find out about what's going on. And it leads you across the world as you know it, and to very interesting and amazing places along the way. And the characters, again, are a great cast of characters, interesting story. These things add in a lot. Now, this was a PlayStation era game in comparison to the last two games, which were Super Nintendo era games. I would highly recommend this game. It's my favorite from the Breath of Fire series. Definitely a must to play. But anyway, so much like Chrono Trigger, this one is both an adventure. He travels across the world, across the land. He ends up in various different places, runs into new people, helps them out on their own journeys. It's a fantasy. They have sort of mystical abilities. Nina, who he meets, has magical healing powers and things like that, and uses magic. There's the dragons, which have, you know, energy breaths and things like that. But it also has a sci-fi element. Without spoiling too much, the last area of the game is a hidden away location where technology was removed from the world. So dragons were not the only thing removed from the world. Technology turns out also have been by this goddess. So you find an area of technology. So that's it for today. I wanted to quickly talk about these 3 video games, give you a little information about them, and let you know you should play them if you haven't already. Many of you probably have, but if you haven't, I would recommend them as one. They're going to consume some time, but they're great ones to play. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about not only using them in your BESM game like I normally would, but I'm also going to talk about using them in your possible Pathfinder games or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So until then, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like this video. Show your support for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. Please subscribe if you already haven't. We're always looking for more members, more citizens. And please share this video. If you know anybody that would learn anything from it, or would just like watching it, please share it with them. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.